One common misconception is that free markets are scientifically defined, inherently not political, and free from government intervention. In fact, the term free market is an oxymoron. The free market necessitates and requires a government to operate. The boundaries of the market and what constitutes a property right is defined politically. For example, the labor market is inherently restricted in the sense that we have child labor laws, you can't buy and sell slaves, and we have immigration law controlling the amount of immigrants that we can hire from abroad. And of course, we have intellectual property law, copyrights, patents, consumer protection law, and even the validity and enforcement of contracts is politically defined. If I write a contract selling myself into slavery, that's not enforceable in courts. Monopolies and externalities are considered market failures and thus are regulated by the government. And who owns the land anyways? Nobody created this land, it was given by the earth. See, ownership is either consensual or it's imposed. Now, of course, we can define property rights however we want, but unless we have the ability to enforce it, it doesn't mean anything. And so enforcement requires a government or government-like entity, basically people with guns, to enforce it. If not the government, then it'll be some group of thugs with guns to enforce whatever rule of law they deem fit. So to summarize, free markets are inherently politically defined and require governments. There is no scientific objective definition of a free market, and this ideal of this free market has been constantly used throughout history to oppose new regulations like child labor laws that we now take for granted. The only free market that exists without the government is the black market, generally run by drug cartels. Anybody who uses but free markets to argue for any position is not really making an argument, but appealing to an ideal of a scientific, objective concept that doesn't actually exist. Another misconception is that the wealthiest countries got rich because of free trade. The reality is that countries like the US and Great Britain were highly protectionist, and only after they got rich did they start imposing free trade on everybody else via institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. These countries were dirt poor a generation ago, but now are among the wealthiest in the world, and they were highly protectionist. The big companies in Japan and Korea were highly protected by the government. Companies like Toyota 50, 60 years ago would have gone bankrupt had they not been bailed out by the government. And this protection in part helped them become the major powerhouses that they are today. Now, my point here isn't to preach that protectionism is the superior way to run an economy. All I'm saying is that this free market ideology isn't supported by the historical evidence, and more often than not, companies became rich not on a policy of free markets, but on policies that promoted and protected domestic industries, enabling their growth into high productivity, high technology industries that enabled them to become powerhouses. Nobody ever got rich making textiles or shoes in sweatshops, which is what countries like Japan and Korea would still be doing today had they adopted free market policies. If you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend reading the books Bad Samaritans or Kicking Away the Ladder by Cambridge economist Ha Joon Chang. Another misconception is that markets are somehow natural. Now, of course, there's a place for markets, but if your neighbor needed to borrow a wrench, would you charge him money? Would you tell your 6-year-old son to go get a job and start paying rent? Probably not. If you did, you're probably a sociopath, but just thinking of it from a practical perspective, it's not in society's best interest for 6-year-olds to be working in the job market. In practice, the only kind of jobs they'd be able to get would be low-skill jobs like working at a supermarket. But if, say, they wanted to become a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, then they would have to get more training, which would require them to go to school, which they can't do if they're having to wait tables and pay rent. That's why we invest in our children with free public education, enabling them to do higher productivity work in the future that ultimately benefits us all more than if we had thrown them out to the free markets to fend for themselves. There's a place for markets, but there are certainly places where markets don't really make any natural sense. It's not like we see animals buying and selling goods with little coins. The free market is kind of like a democracy where instead of one vote per person, you have one vote per dollar. So the more money you have, the more votes you have. If you don't have any money, you don't have any votes. You're irrelevant. And markets naturally serve and cater towards people with money. So if you don't have any money, the market doesn't serve you. That's why the homeless people on the streets of New York City and San Francisco are effectively invisible to the economy. Nobody is serving them because nobody wants them, nobody cares for them. They're just there. They don't have any money, so there's no reason for a market to develop to serve them. The only care they get is human charity and sympathy. Or if somebody's somebody's just that desperate to hire a worker that they're willing to hire a homeless person, which is pretty rare. This is why, if your eyes are open, you've probably noticed that the market has been catering more and more towards wealthy people. If you live in New York City, you'll notice that all the new buildings that get built are all luxury glass towers that cater towards millionaires and billionaires, not regular people. This is partially why there's a shortage of affordable housing. The market doesn't serve you if you don't have any money. It's more profitable to serve the millionaires and billionaires than the average person with $5,000 in their bank account. There is nothing about a free market that ensures that everybody has access, because if you don't have any money, you have no purchasing power, you have nothing. If somebody slips through the cracks of our healthcare system or education system, there's no self-correcting mechanism to ensure that everybody has access. This is just how markets work. Maybe it's a bug, maybe it's a future, but it's the reality of it. So what do you think? Do you think markets should dictate every aspect of life? Or do you think this free market fundamentalism has gone a bit too far? Post down in the comments what you think. Also, I'm thinking of putting these economics related videos on a separate channel. Let me know if you would prefer that. To be honest, I don't really know why most people are following me. I know some people are here for the travel, others for tech, others for the economics related stuff. So let me know if these videos should be on a separate channel or this one. In the meantime, I'll probably keep posting it here though, unless I were to have a ton of content that it would really justify having it on a separate channel. But that's it for this video. Have a nice day.
지디카라스